This is very cozy. Dear respected Thai, dear Sangha, today is the 28th of July in the year 2021, and we just finished our summer retreat with about 200 people here. It's a wonderful moment for Deer Park to have actually people here. We had tweens, teens, and many friends from all over the country and the world. And now we've been enjoying lazy days, so we don't have any guests right now. And so it's a quiet day in the monastery. And tomorrow we go back into our schedule. So today I would like to present the 15th tenet, and as well respond to questions that have been written in over the past 14 classes. So I tried to compile the questions that have been put in the comments on the videos on the Deer Park YouTube channel, as well as ones that you've written into our website. And if I missed any questions, please let me know. So we'll see how we do with all of that. Okay. So the 15th tenet is about happiness and suffering. So the mindfulness of suffering helps us recognize the existing conditions for happiness. the existing conditions of happiness. Usually when we reflect on suffering, we feel like we suffer more. If we don't do it skillfully, it means we just drown in our despair, our worry, or our regret. But when we are mindful of suffering, then we don't get carried away by it. We see this is suffering. Usually when we're suffering, we're not aware that we're suffering. We just feel lousy and depressed, worried, anxious. And we're carried away by that emotion. But mindfulness helps us to stop, come back and see, it may be that you have 2 legs and you can still walk. It may be that you can still breathe. Hopefully you can still breathe. It may be that you have eyes that can see. It may be that you have even one friend or one family member or some person who can listen to you. Already those are conditions for happiness. So by looking into suffering, we recognize all the good things that are already there. So recognizing the existing conditions of happiness. So mindfulness of suffering also helps prevent the creation of wrong actions. So it helps us to stop. So usually when we're angry, that's okay. But if we're not mindful of our anger, we say something, we do something, and then we cannot take that back. So the point of mindfulness, to be aware of the anger. I'm angry. And I know, because I'm training, that if I say that thing, I do that thing, it's going to make me suffer and the other person suffer. And when you get that realization, you suddenly have the power to change the future. There's a whole future there where you've said that thing and you've done that thing, and you don't have to live in that future anymore. You can live in another future where you don't say that thing and you don't do that thing. So it's really like you have a multiverse in front of you of possibilities when mindfulness is there. Actually, it's always there, but we're usually not aware of it. So mindfulness allows us to see that there are many possibilities, maybe an infinite number of things that we can say and do, or not say and not do. And we learn to recognize the tone of our emotion in that moment. So this is anger. And I know when I speak out of anger, I speak out of jealousy, I speak out of despair, that I may pull the other person into my despair, into my anger, into my jealousy. And so I am determined not to say that thing, not to do that thing, but come back to myself and just breathe. Usually when we're angry at someone, we want to pull in other people to support us in our anger. So we have a team, and we're all together angry at that other person. Or we want the other person to react. That's what we're looking to. We're angry, and so we know that if we punch, then we want them to punch back because we want to fight, because we want our anger to spread like a wildfire. We need them to know that we're angry. But with mindfulness, all that's important is that we know that we are angry and that this is a wildfire. Here in California, we know about wildfires. And we want to contain it as soon as possible. So it doesn't mean we're not aware of the danger of fire. Yeah? We recognize the fire is there. So mindfulness is not passivity. We recognize the emotion is there, and we learn how to stop, to contain it, not to allow that fire to spread beyond a certain parameter, because we want to protect our loved ones, we want to protect our friendship, protect our relationships. Yeah. There's so much suffering in the world, we don't need to add to the suffering that is already there. So with mindfulness of the emotion, then we learn how to prevent the creation of wrong actions and the planting of negative seeds. I know that I have said things, I have thought things, I have acted in a way that has planted seeds of suffering in myself, in others around me. And as a mindfulness practitioner, and just as a human being, I recognize that those seeds will manifest at some point. That suffering continues in the world. And so this is where meditation comes in, looking deeply into our own mind and our experience of life in the present moment, and seeing that painful things that manifest are the product of seeds that have been planted from just as this body or just as this individual. But we see that we are boundless. So there is no me, myself, or my alone, which is experiencing this, but it is actually part of a collective manifestation. And so we are representing all of our ancestors, representing our teachers, our friends, all beings, and all of them are there experiencing this hurt that is manifesting in this other person who is also representing all of their ancestors, their teachers, their friends, and so forth. And this is a process that's going on, and it's really happening. But it is simplistic to just blame that person. We need to look more deeply as practitioners. We need to accept that they are just one part of all of the conditions that have brought about this suffering. So this is where the teaching on the seeds in mind consciousness is very helpful. This metaphor of that we've seen already before, of a garden that is down in the store consciousness. This is the mind consciousness. This is just a metaphor to help us understand our mind. And store consciousness is not an individual matter. It is individual and collective. We can think of it like a candle that illuminates the space around it. When it is surrounded by hundreds of candles, then the illumination is even greater. So we can see one flame, but we see that the whole light, that is the collective consciousness. And so there's no boundary of one candle and the light of the collective. So store consciousness is, we can think of it like that. He said we can see it as the earth itself. And in the earth there are seeds. Some seeds have been planted consciously, but others have just been there naturally for hundreds of millions of years, generating plants, growing up, producing flowers, fruits, and further seeds. And there are seeds that are in the soil, and they need certain conditions to manifest. And we know that here in California, when there is a forest fire, many plants come up out of the soil that otherwise would not have a chance to grow because of the established plants that create shade and use the water, and once the chaparral is established. But when suddenly there's a burn, you have all kinds of new plants that have a chance to get the sunlight and the water, and those seeds were there, but the conditions were not sufficient for them to manifest. So when there's a major change in our life, when we move somewhere, when we lose our job, maybe when we lose our partner, it may be like that, like a forest fire has burned across, the chaparral of our daily life. And we think we suffer so much. But if we look at this is something manifesting from seeds that have been planted from long before. And now new plants will have a chance to manifest that otherwise would not have had a chance to grow. Then we don't see it as a good thing or bad thing, but it's just change. It's impermanence. So the same is true of our mind. We can look and see that there are seeds there. Seeds like compassion, understanding. Even we don't see ourselves as a compassionate person, but the seed is there. And if we surround ourselves with compassionate people, if we study the Dhamma, we have a chance to take care of ourselves, because we first have compassion for ourselves. We learn how to water that seed of compassion, then it can start to grow. There was one teacher, and I really love this story. And he was giving a Dhamma talk, and there was one man who said, I suffer so much because I want to be generous, but I can't be generous. I try so hard to give, but somehow I just can't do it. And so the teacher said to him, well, try this. You can take an apple in your hand, in your left hand, and you breathe in and out, and then you give the apple to your right hand. And then you hold it in your right hand, and then you can breathe in and out, and then you can give the apple from your right hand to your left hand. It's kind of training. You start at the very basic. So you practice giving something, this apple, to yourself from one hand to the other. And then, once you get down that, you can learn to give the apple to somebody else. I love that story because we don't have to wait around and just think, I'm not a compassionate person, I'm not a generous person. What I love about the Dhamma and meditation is that it's like there for us right now. We can do it any moment. And of course we can just go on autopilot and continue to do our habitual ways of thinking, acting, and speaking. But right now, you also have a chance to stop, be aware of the suffering, and see the conditions of happiness that are there, so that you can put an end to actions which plant the seed of suffering in ourselves and in others, in the collective consciousness. And you do that right now. You don't have to wait until you're with somebody else. It's always available, just like the breathing. It's always there for us. So meditation practice is portable, available in every moment, and we can be generous to ourselves. We can be compassionate to ourselves. That is a fair way to train our compassion, to train our generosity, to train our patience. We don't have to wait for somebody else to be generous to them. But the more we do it to ourselves, the more we can do it to others. And generosity also means not doing things. Like sometimes not eating that extra dessert after a meal. You see, you get the insight. This is not going to be good for me. I'm not going to sleep well. I'm going to, damaging to my body. And you just practice not eating it, and you don't have to tell anyone. This is a self-compassion. And sometimes you can eat it too. It's not to eat or not to eat, it's not the question. It's awareness of suffering that is the key. And recognizing, I already have enough conditions to be happy. I don't need to eat that piece of chocolate or that cake or whatever. It's very simple things, meditation, but it has profound effects. And it's not it's not about right or wrong, but it's about awareness of suffering. This is the deep Plum Village teaching. Of course, the Buddha taught about right and wrong because he wanted to help people to avoid, perilous paths, difficult situations. But the deeper teaching is that we cultivate an awareness of suffering ourselves, that we see that, I'm not going to say that, I'm not going to touch that. We know in our workplace, in our family, there are things that are so delicate, and sometimes people are baiting us. They dangle it in front of us and they want us to give our opinion. But can we just love and not get entangled in the drama of other people's opinions by adding our own? It's very interesting if you do that. You're there just to support. The word Dhamma means support. It means like the foundation. It's related to supporting, like the earth that holds us up. And so the Buddha taught the Dhamma for us to support, right? We don't want to be, our role as practitioners, as teachers, as spiritual friends, is not to confront. It is to support. Because it's like the night. Without the night, we cannot appreciate the light. So suffering and happiness are like that. They are not they're like two sides of one coin. So with less suffering, you have more happiness. And with more happiness, there's less suffering. But the happiness and suffering are not in conflict with each other. It's not like these things are my happiness and these things are my suffering. But they are actually inextricably and intimately connected. Just like night and day. Night is not in conflict with the day, but they are the manifestation of the absence or presence of light. Yeah, so they only make sense together, just like birth and death. They only make sense together. Birth does not make any sense without death. Without dying, there's no being born. And without being born, of course, there's no dying. So we don't celebrate birth any more than we celebrate death. They are just manifestations of the same phenomena. Yeah. We can listen to a sound of the bell. So negative seeds means seeds that will bring about suffering. So the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths. And I write them in Sanskrit. Partly because it's very simple in Sanskrit. So, dukkha. Dukkha is suffering. And sukha is happiness. And in Sanskrit, it's very clear that they are just opposites. So it's not clear in English, happiness and suffering. So sometimes Thai says well-being and ill-being, so that we understand that you cannot separate the two, because it's very clear in Sanskrit and Pali, sukha and dukkha. Du means kind of like unpleasant, and su means pleasant or good. Unpleasant or bad, pleasant or good. And ka is, well, in the very ancient Sanskrit, it just meant it's related to the axle in the chariot. So when the axle is good, then your ride in the chariot is very pleasant. Because at that time, chariots were very important to the peoples that brought the ancient, like Indo-Iranian, Indian, like root of Sanskrit language to India. So they had horses, because horses had been domesticated in Central Asia, and they learned one of the dominant features was that they learned to pull a chariot behind a horse in battle. And so that made them very effective fighters. And so the ka is like when you have the axle, which is very smooth with the wheels, then when you ride in the chariot, it's very pleasant, very smooth. But if it is uneven or broken, it feels unpleasant. So dukkha is not evil or something. It's just like it makes things really unpleasant. The thing that like stick and just make, like pain, suffering, mental. It includes mental, physical, unpleasant feelings, emotions, and sukha is happiness, pleasant, a joyride. Not joyride. Anyway, very, very, very pleasant experience. Dukkha samudaya. Samudaya means the arising of suffering. So the cause. What are the things that bring about the arising of dukkha, that make this unpleasantness, these blocks, this trauma happen? So this is to be understood. The origin of suffering. So this is why mindfulness is so helpful, right? So the mindfulness of suffering helps us to see the dukkha samudaya, what are the conditions for suffering. And when we see the conditions for suffering, we see right away the conditions of happiness, which is the third noble truth, dukkha nirodha, which means the cessation of suffering. Sukha. That is, Thai helps us to remember that the cessation of suffering is happiness. So there was a question written, how can we let go of our attachment to happiness? If we are attached to happiness, we want to let go of all of our attachments so that we suffer less. But what if we're attached to happiness? I think this question is from Ana Maria Leiras. If the ultimate goal is letting go, then shouldn't we also let go of happiness? In the historical dimension, happiness is impermanent and subject to arise and disappear. If in order to reach nirvana we must water seeds of joy, but joy is also impermanent, then happiness must be to transcend joy and pain and happiness and reach a state beyond positive and negative feelings. But doesn't this lead to think that then we must become detached and indifferent. So when we talk about ultimate goal, first of all, we have to be careful, because as we're reminded in the Heart Sutra, there's nothing to attain. So anytime we talk about a goal, we get caught in something that's out there, beyond where we are right now. So first of all, the practice is to come back to the present moment and see what's going on in my body right now. It's always the first thing. When we notice ourselves putting a goal, some kind of happiness in front of ourselves, a degree, a position, money, power, some situation, maybe we just want our family to come together for the holidays. For some people, that's a big suffering. For other people, that's their dream. For some people, it's a dream. The reality is suffering. Any goal that we put outside of ourselves, that's something that then makes us become aware of the absence, of the lack of the conditions of happiness that we have in the present moment. Because we lack that condition, that ultimate goal out there, we suffer in the present moment. And so this is, many spiritual practitioners in the past get caught, and in the future, and in the present, get caught in this idea of happiness that is somewhere else. And that is clearly not what the Buddha was experiencing and what he was teaching. So of course he wanted to inspire his students to practice and go deeper in their practice. But the experience of going deeper is itself happiness. The practice gives us joy as we practice. So letting go brings joy right away. If it doesn't bring joy, then it's not really letting go. Yeah, so there's no attachment. Of course, joy is impermanent. Happiness is impermanent. And we cannot grasp onto that happiness and joy, because it will just slip through our fingers like the air. But if we learn to continue letting go and realize, wow, the more I let go, the more joy I experience. The more I let go, the more happiness I experience. And this is happiness born from letting go. So we talk about happiness and joy born from happiness that causes an attachment is not true happiness. It's just an attachment. In Vietnamese, Thầy taught Lý Sinh Hỷ Lạc. Li is like cutting off, or putting something at a distance, distancing ourselves from those things like sense pleasures that bring about attachment. So if we find ourselves compulsively on the internet clicking to look for sexy images of women or something like that, that is attachment. So we need to put a distance. We need to say, I need to step back from this. Maybe I need a good spiritual friend. Like we do in the monastery, we go on the internet together. So that you have another person there, and so your awareness changes when that other person is there, from when you are just alone. And that trains our mind to think like, the more and more I go on the internet with somebody else present, the more that I cultivate an awareness that it's not just an individual who's compulsively looking for erotic pictures, but it's actually my ancestors, my community. I'm doing this with all of them. And so we prevent the creation of wrong actions. So we learn to let go of that, or put a distance. Yeah. So the fine manners that we practice as monastics and the precepts help us to do that. There are, formal guidelines for monastics that allow us to not get into situations where we continue to become attached to certain sense pleasures, most sense pleasures. And then that helps us to let go, to be more free in our way of living in the world. And then with time we see, well, I'm quite happy like this. I don't need those like sexy images. I don't need to go to a bar or a club or whatever. Yeah, I can be happy right where I am. So there's no goal. So already when we talk about an ultimate goal, we have to be very careful. Just come back to our body, come back to our breathing, and just practice letting go right here and right now. And the happiness and joy come with letting go. And if we get attached to happiness and joy, then we practice to let go even more. So there are always more and more things that we can let go of. Tai often told the story of the one day when the Buddha was sitting with monks in the forest, and a farmer came along, and he was very agitated, worried, and out of breath. And he's running through the forest, and he stops and sees the Buddha, and he says, Dear Buddha, I've lost all of my cows. They're all of my wealth. I don't know what to do. I'm ruined. Please, have you seen my cows? And the Buddha said, we're sorry, we have not seen your cows. You'll have to continue on and keep looking for them. And then the farmer went on, and the Buddha turned to his monks and said, do you know that you are the most fortunate people on the planet? You don't have any cows to lose. So that teaching is an invitation for us to look and see what are the cows that we're still holding on to. The cows that we think are the source of our happiness, but they actually may be the source of our suffering. And just throw those cows away. Just let them go. No longer think these cows are me for mine. Our projects, our dreams, our ultimate goals can become a cow. And because we want to realize them, we suffer. So we let them go. Just let them go. And they will find their way. Don't worry about them. It's like our children when they grow up. We've transmitted through our way of living the best that we could. And now we just let them go. We always just support, but we don't continue to be an obstacle and try to mold them to be the image of what we ourselves feel is lacking in our own lives. That is the suffering of the parent. But if you learn to let go of your children, then you can touch true love, true happiness. They are a free person, and every cell in their body contains you as their parent. But they cannot be truly happy until you practice letting them go. So this happiness born from letting go is very powerful. So if it is a happiness that we get attached to, it's not true happiness. We need to look again and see what is true happiness. Because true happiness has the quality of letting go. And that is a teaching of the third noble truth, dukkha nirodha. So when we we realize the conditions that give rise to this ill being, this suffering, then we can learn to let go of them. No longer continue to water, to plant negative seeds, because we recognize them for what they are. Not because I told you it, but because you experienced it in your life. You look into your life and you see, when I said that thing, when I did that thing, you have to be honest and see what the fruit of your actions are. And as a monk, I also make many mistakes. I continue, when I'm not mindful, to plant negative seeds, but I have the monastery and I have space to then reflect, and I go for the sitting meditation and I see, that emotion was still there, that desire, I was still grasping onto something, and that's where that suffering is. So I learn, there's more to let go, more to let go, more to let go. So that's the training. And when you see that happening, you see, then you're on the path. Yeah? And that's the fourth noble truth, is the path. Gamini patipada. So dukkha nirodha is the cessation of suffering, which is happiness. So letting go of the conditions that give rise to suffering is the very definition of happiness. Any happiness that doesn't involve letting go of the conditions that give rise to suffering is not true happiness. And of course that happiness is impermanent, because seeds are there, they've been planted in the past, and they will. But if we are on a path, we will know how to embrace those difficult moments when they arise, when situations, actions that we've done in the past, that our ancestors have done in the past, that our society has done in the past, and those manifest as racism, violence, hatred, abuse. We know that those seeds are also in our consciousness. It may not be in this lifetime that we've committed these actions, but we are experiencing the fruit of our ancestors, both our blood ancestors, our spiritual ancestors, our land ancestors. And we can smile, and like the Buddha said, we can bear it up. Yeah, we can. It doesn't mean that we just accept it as a victim, but we learn to breathe mindfully and continue to recognize that those seeds that have been planted in the past may also continue to be planted if we don't transform in ourselves the very root of those actions. So that is how we change the collective consciousness. We can listen to a bell. So, Manas from class 3 asked, I've been wondering how experiences and emotions such as love, which can be immensely positive, are approached in the Buddhist tradition. Thank you for touching on this. How are mental health challenges such as intrusive thoughts in particular discussed or understood from a Buddhist perspective? So love is understanding. That's a very basic teaching of the Buddha. We cannot truly love unless we understand, and particularly understand the nature of suffering. So when we love ourselves, it means that we understand ourselves. We understand that the suffering we experience in the present moment is due to causes and conditions. When we don't understand, we cannot truly love ourselves, because it just seems like chaotic randomness, right? We believe when we don't look deeply and see the causes and conditions that have given rise to our experience of suffering, continue on, and we feel like we are just a victim of circumstances, and we suffer more and more and more and more. We cannot see that there are reasons why this suffering is manifest, and those reasons have to do with our own actions, with the actions of our ancestors, with the actions within the community. So with the eyes of non-self, we look deeply into the collective consciousness as well as our individual consciousness. Just like the candle is not like the from the collective. They are interpenetrating each other. We look deeply into our own mind, and there we touch the collective mind. We see the many conditions that have given rise to that suffering. That is true love from a Buddhist perspective, because that gives rise to compassion, understanding. We are more kind to others because we see if we are kind, then we water the seeds of compassion and understanding in them as well as ourselves. If we are harsh, judgmental, critical, we water that seed in our own consciousness and in the consciousness of the other person, and it manifests as suffering. So true love is understanding. It's understanding the nature of suffering. And that is also understanding our mental health. Now, we have a modern understanding of mental illness. And but if we look to the Buddha's time, from his eyes, the whole world has mental illness. So we all have a degree of mental illness, and that's because we don't understand the nature of our suffering. And so the whole spiritual path is to help people to wake up to their own mental illness. Yeah. Now we have there's a kind of stigma that gets attached to us if we say we have a mental illness. But as Buddhists and spiritual practitioners, we recognize we all have some kind of mental illness. And that's why we come together to live together, because we want to transform that illness, that ill-being, dukkha. Dukkha is just another way of saying mental illness in mind and body. We can translate dukkha as trauma, we can translate it as mental illness, suffering. These are all just different words. The point is, can we look deeply into it and see its roots and learn how to be a skillful gardener to remove the nutriment that gives rise to that mental illness, that trauma, that suffering. Ioana Brenestonu, sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly, also asked after class 3 on the 5 skandhas. Normally the 4th skandha is listed as the aggregate of compositional factors. And we talk about it as mental formations. So she wondered why this choice of word, and is there any difference between the two terms? So, no, there's no difference. It's just words. Compositional factors, mental formations. So usually the term is samskara. For the 4th skandha, so it includes our emotions, it includes our thinking. So we have body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness are the 5 skandhas. And we talk about five skandhas not for the purpose of creating lines between them, but actually just looking at the same thing from different facets. And it's more to do with the way in which we get attached to those, to our body, to our feelings, to our perceptions, to our mental formations and consciousness. But it's not to say that they are clearly like separated from one another. They interpenetrate each other. And so in the Plum Village tradition, we talk about our five skandhas being in harmony. And one important way of keeping our skandhas in harmony is recognizing that they interpenetrate each other. They're not, my consciousness is not totally separate from my perceptions, is not totally separate, and mental formations include perceptions and consciousness. Yeah, formations, samskara, includes feelings, perceptions, consciousness. From a broader, we can talk about formations from a broader perspective. Everything is a formation. This body is also a formation. Anything that is made up of, as you say, compositional, is a formation. And as we know, everything is built on everything else. So a table is a table, but if we take we take one leg off, is it any more or less a table? If we take all the hinges, the nails or screws out, and we lay it apart as different pieces, we have a leg of a table, the top of the table, maybe the foot, the bracing underneath. We cannot think of the table without all of its parts. And so having this formations in the five skandhas is helping us to remember that all of these things are not like fundamental elemental things, but they are all compositional. They are all made up of something else, of non-it elements. Actually, this term is used in many different traditions. For example, in the Hindu tradition, samskar is a ceremony. Like when you name, nama samskar is when you name, the ceremony of giving your name to your child when a few days after they're born. Or like a marriage, it's a word for a special coordinated ritual. What the Buddha did was he brought that he saw that inside our mind there are patterns of emotions, thinking, attention, habitual energies which are manifesting, which are conditioned by our way of living, our way of getting attached to things. And so samskara is a broad term to describe all of this kind of internalized, we could say like internalized rituals, internalized formations, ways of operating, habitual ways of operating. So this is very important. It's a kind of revolution for look in the mind. I mean, think about this is 2,600 years ago. We're talking about, in a very nuanced way, the Buddha was talking about the mind, and not for the sake of just describing the mind, but for the sake of freeing our mind. So samskara is helping us to understand that our anger is not by itself alone. It's not fundamental, but it's something that is composed of other elements. Like our anger can be composed of our jealousy, our sadness, our hurt, all these things. And our hurt is also composed of other things. So looking deeply, we see the causes and conditions as to every mental formation. And samskara is primarily referring, in this case, in the skandhas, to mental formations. So I hope that helps, that question. E.P. Hardy asks, after the 5th class, what's the difference between attachment energy and joining energy? And I read this a few times. So I'm guessing by joining energy you mean like connecting, because we talk about connection, right? Or touching. So when I look at myself and I notice that there's something stuck there, I know it's attachment. If it's not stuck, then if it's flowing, just like a river, then that's the way that I know that's not attachment. That's just, it's like the river. When there's something blocking it, it finds a way around. So we can practice to be like that. We enter the, there's an expression, entering the stream, or stream enterer. So we go into the stream of the Dhamma, and we learn to recognize when there's something still stuck in our way of thinking. We know it's attachment. So that's my own way of knowing what is attachment and what is like interpenetration, or like you say, joining energy, feeling connected. Yeah. In fact, it's the attachment which is the opposite. It makes me feel isolated on my own. I kind of think of it like when you're alone and nobody's looking, and you go into the kitchen and you open the refrigerator and you look in and you're like, I can eat anything I want. It's kind of that, that mind. You feel like there's attachment there. It's okay, you can do it, but you recognize there's attachment and you're working on it. You let go, and or maybe in that moment you see there's attachment, you just shut the refrigerator door and you just go back and lay down and just follow your breathing, and you say, you see, you're able to let go of your attachment. It's not my hunger which is speaking there. There's something, some emotion, some feeling that we want to get rid of it, so we want to fill ourselves with food, distract ourselves from that difficult emotion. So that's recognizing attachment and what is feeling connected, feeling joined. That was a question from E.P. Hardy. I had another question. Iwana Brenestano. In class 6, I didn't understand why the ultimate dimension is vertically represented. Is it possible to clarify this point? And I think I did clarify this point about the vertical and horizontal aspect of the two truths. So again, this is just an image to help us. It's not anything absolute. All of words, teachings, concepts, they're all just skillful means to help us to understand. They're not for the purpose of treating as dogma. So even the Four Noble Truths, as Thai often said, they are to help us to be free. And unfortunately, some Buddhists, they treat it as like dogma or absolute truth, and you miss the point. The point is to help us to be free. So this teaching on the historical dimension is also just a skillful means. It is a teaching that came from the first few hundred years after the Buddha's teaching. Many monks and nuns and lay practitioners, but especially monks who were kind of scholars, they wanted to categorize the Buddha's teaching, to kind of map it onto all of reality, so that there was a Dhamma language that would correspond to every phenomenon in the universe. And by doing that, they inadvertently perhaps made nirvana seem very far away. Like you have to learn this massive kind of intricate, what they call the abhidharma, in order to have any chance of touching nirvana. And so what started in the very simple and poetic teachings of the Buddha became this vast and intricate and very inaccessible kind of scholastic morass of teaching. So this teaching of the ultimate and historical dimension, as far as we know, originated from looking at the spoken words of the Buddha. For example, the Buddha sometimes referred to himself, or he referred to Ananda. But we understand from the teaching of non-self that there is no real Ananda or Buddha, that these are all just fictions. And so they got stuck because they say, but the Buddha says there's no self, but then he refers to himself as I sometimes. And so that can't be right because he says there's no self. So this kind of thinking, like we could say overly rationalizing the teaching of the Buddha. And so we started talking about there being two ways of looking at it. There's the historical dimension and the ultimate. Or sometimes it's written as conventional, for the sake of convention, samvriti satya, and the ultimate, paramartha satya. So in the historical dimension, the Buddha talked about himself, he talked about Ananda. They were walking through a sali on a beautiful day. That's all happening at the historical dimension. But the ultimate dimension, there is no self. There is no birth, no death, no coming, no being, no non-being. And eventually this teaching was deeply integrated into Buddhist teaching to help us to not get stuck in confusing the historical dimension and the ultimate. There's no contradiction between the teaching on no birth, no death, no being, no non-being, no coming, no going. That this is the quality of nirvana, just as the Buddha taught in the early Buddhist teaching. When the Buddha refers to himself or to Ananda or to others in the historical dimension, using conventional language. So it's to help to get stuck in that and seeing these as being in contradiction to each other. Is that clear? Does that make sense? So this is where this teaching on the historical dimension and the ultimate dimension, as far as we know, manifested in the early proposed looking at this using and then I kind of added a third dimension. So we had two dimensions. We said, okay, we can think of the historical dimension as this line going in a horizontal, and then the ultimate is the vertical. And then I didn't explain it fully in that class. So and we were talking about time and space, right? So the point is, Tai was teaching that at any point in time and space, well, we only always have the now and the here. It is possible to touch the ultimate. It means the qualities of no birth, no death, no being, no non-being, or nirvana. But we don't go searching around in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions for nirvana. So this model, whether it's 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions, the ultimate is always going to go beyond whatever dimension you're in. So if you have 3 dimensions, it's the 4th dimension. If you have 4 dimensions, it's the 5th dimension. But you cannot reduce it to any concept like time or space or an extension of it. But at every point, there is the possibility to touch nirvana. That is the main point, to touch the ultimate. And so when Tai talks about the vertical, it means that we are going along, it's just a metaphor. We're going along a line from here to here, like through time. And at every point, there's a possibility of touching the ultimate. So that's the meaning of the vertical. And if we are moving in 3 dimensions, like here, and then we add a 4th dimension. You see, the point is that the ultimate cannot be reduced to any kind of measurable space. So usually we talk about dimension, it means some kind of measurable space. So Tai is just trying to help us to use an image to see that we don't have to go somewhere else to touch the ultimate. The ultimate is right here and right now. When we quiet our mind and come back to the present moment, we see that, as Tai used to say, we have already been nirvanized since beginningless time. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the teaching is that to free ourselves of ideas of beginning and ending. Like now we think of like the Big Bang and then the complete heat death of the universe sometime long in the future, right? But again, it's just that tendency to want to create beginnings and endings. And it's also just a creation of the human mind in our trying to understand the universe. And the point is, we're not going along a line progressing into the future, but the wisdom of the Buddha is that in the present moment is everything we need to be fully present, fully happy, fully free. So that's what the teaching on the vertical means. Excuse me for going quickly, but this is a Q&A session. Had a number of questions. She also asked, in class 7, I'm wondering in the context of the historical dimension, in what way does the ripening result of actions relate to the concept of rebirth? What is Thai's, you clarify Thai's way of talking about rebirth? So, so we learned about planting of negative seeds. It's planting positive seeds, and we think, oh, since I planted those seeds, I will receive the fruit of those seeds. But we know that this body is impermanent. These feelings are impermanent. And so, who is the one who experiences the fruit of actions? Because I'm not the same person who began this talk. I've already changed. Just if you look at the contents of my stomach digesting through my intestines, I'm already a different person than who started this talk. Let alone the cells which are constantly being born and constantly dying in my body. And so rebirth and death are happening always in the present moment. And the teaching of Plum Village is to understand rebirth in that way. That by my way of thinking, my way of speaking, my way of acting, I'm like an orange tree, producing flowers and fruits. And if the input is good, it means if I take good care of my mind, I'm a good gardener, planting wholesome seeds, then I try my best to, my way of thinking and my way of speaking, my way of acting, to have those good seeds manifest. And then the seeds that bring about suffering, I learn how to invite them to go back down, not to continue to strengthen them. Yeah, so not suppress them, but remove the conditions that give rise to my anger, my despair, my jealousy. So that is, the concept of rebirth is happening in every moment. Every time we have a thought, every time we open our mouth and speak, every time we do something, we are being reborn. And so the concept of rebirth, and those actions are going out into the world. So just like the Buddha taught, and we continue to be inspired by his teaching and get insight, and just as Tai taught, but is now silent because of his stroke, we continue to receive the benefit of his teaching. So that is rebirth, that is transmission. So the Plum Village way of looking at rebirth is as a kind of transmission. And we don't see ourselves as this body, and there's something within this body which then is reborn in another person. But rather we see all of our actions, all of our thoughts continuing out into the universe as our rebirth. And so Thai would always say, you know, and even in the time of the Buddha, his students often said we are like born from the mouth of the Buddha. Born from the mouth of the Buddha. So through learning the Dhamma, and practicing it, we are constantly reborn. And even also if we don't practice the Dhamma, we are reborn, whether we like it or not, because we are impermanent. The body continues to regenerate itself, right? So meditation is choosing, again, in the multiverse of possibilities that can happen in every moment, we try to choose ones with less suffering, reducing the suffering for ourselves and for others. And so we learn that since we're constantly being reborn, if we take this moment right now to change another direction, and then the next moment, and the next moment, and the next moment, then we experience less suffering and more happiness. So that is a short summary of rebirth. Tasha Amy, could you please speak to if and or when jumping off the plate is ever necessary on the path? So I think I was talking about one of the attainments of Plum, which is froglessness. So in Vietnam, they say if you put the frog on the plate, the frog will jump off the plate. And then you put it back on the plate, it will jump off again. And you put it back on, and so forth. So inside each of us, we have that kind of frog. So there's a kind of restlessness within ourselves. And we go to one place, and as soon as we are there, we want to go somewhere else. And then when we are there, we want to go somewhere else. And our life just becomes a series of wishing we were somewhere else. And so the froglessness means learning how to recognize that restlessness within us and embrace it with mindfulness and see that that is a form of suffering. So notice so Thai used that image of the frog that always just keeps jumping off the plate. And he said the first thing we need to realize when we come to Plum Village as monks and nuns, certainly, but also as lay practitioners, is the attainment of froglessness. When we look deeply, we see that that restlessness may be very, very deep in our ancestral, the current of our ancestors. For example, as an American who grew up in the States, I realized that almost all of my ancestors, fled Europe in the late 19th century, early 20th century, because of poverty. They couldn't own property. So eventually they decided to uproot themselves to get a ship and come over here to the United States. And in fact, all of my ancestors at some point. On my mom's side, there's some that go way back to the Pilgrim time, but other than that, mostly they are more recent. And so I know that restlessness, that even though they suffered so much, there's like hoping for a better place somewhere else, this new land. And so that's a huge accumulation of restlessness. All those branches of our ancestors somehow uprooted themselves from the land of their fathers and mothers and ancestors and came over and experienced a lot of hardship and suffering. And so I know that there's a kind of superficial restlessness, like the frog jumping off the plate, but there's even very deep restlessness, which is wanting always to move somewhere else, to find happiness in some other place that I inherit from my ancestors. And so my practice is to look at that and say, oh, and smile to it. When I notice myself wanting to jump off, to escape, just get out of the situation where I am, just get out of here, go somewhere else, is can I come back and just be with that? Just be with that restlessness. So that's the teaching on jumping off the plate, is learning to just stay on the plate and see the conditions for happiness that are, and then you get a lot of strength, a lot of autonomy, sovereignty over your own mind, because you no longer are a victim of your situation, but you're able to be fully there for it. That is the teaching of jumping off the plate. How to learn not to jump off the plate. Froglessness. And we use it on the path to touch the cessation of suffering. Okay, last question, again from E.P. Hardy from the 13th class. How can I cultivate an awareness that what is best for the community means survival to me as an individual? Why does it seem that one community offers higher thought from community for the individuals, and in another from individuals for the community? I feel my activism is causing aggravation. How can I change? Why does it seem that one community offers higher thought from community for the individual? As I think she means values the community higher than the individual, and others values the individual higher than the community. So again, we come back to this collective and individual. So I learned from one of my elder sisters, Sister Yunim, this image of the individual and many candles together. And the light that comes from the one candle is not separate from the light of the collective. They interpenetrate each other. So I think that's very helpful. We should not divide individual and community, because that's an artificial division. Actually, the community is within the individual, and the individual is within the community. And actually, there is no individual. As we learn, samskara, formation. So even the individual is made up of compositional factors. So they are divisible. They are not indivisible. So we learn that we ourselves, this body, is also a community. So an idea of an individual is actually based in ignorance. And it is a concept which has really plagued many communities, countries around the world for the past. Tai often said the 20th century was the century of the individual. And the 21st century has to be a century of the collective, of the community. Because we find a way to heal from the terrible trauma from this concept of individual. Actually, for millions, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years really, we've only ever known community. And so this concept of individual is very, very new. And it's, I think, from a misunderstanding of the nature of action that we've been learning today. Yeah? If we really penetrate this teaching on karma, action, then there's no longer this artificial need for an idea for an individual. We create the individual because we want to understand how we cause happiness or suffering to ourselves and others. And so we think, that person, he killed that person, he stole that money, he did that horrible thing. He did that as an individual, we need to punish him as an individual. But we don't, that means we completely forget about his teachers, his community, his class, his economic situation. We don't look at any of the factors and see that that person is only the aggregate of all of their line of ancestors, their teachers, their community, which we are also a part of. So it's a way of kind of absolving ourselves of any responsibility for the actions of that person when we see that they are also a part of us and we have contributed to their violence, to their theft, their criminal activity. That is the insight of interbeing. So we take responsibility. So, yeah. So I think when a community values the individual, it's based on ignorance. It's based on a misunderstanding of our life, of our way of living on this planet. And we need to look deeper with the eyes of no self and see that suffering is not an individual matter. So thank you for listening, and thank you for... I also want to thank the brothers, Brother Min, Brother Min An, Kenley, and for all these weeks for supporting, and Brother Min Lo as well, for supporting us to put these talks online. We'll try our best. It seemed like people are enjoying it, so I try to keep doing it. Originally, this class started just for the brothers to go deeper into Thay's teaching, and that's so important that we continue to transmit that to the younger generation of monastics. And I'm happy that people can enjoy it online, and I'm thankful that the brothers are willing to do it even on lazy day today, retreat. So thank you, brothers.